Nobody is immune to this. The best leader out there, if they're feeling bad, thinking, gosh, I think we might have some toxicity in my company, the answer is, yeah, you probably do. When you hear about toxicity in an organization, don't say, well, we probably would never be like that. Say, there may be some that's creeping up. I want to go find that, and I'm the leader of the organization, and I'm going to figure it out and own it. I can't believe that when an executive team gets a survey back that says we have a dysfunctional or toxic culture, that they're really surprised. Welcome to At the Table, the podcast that lives at the intersection of teamwork, leadership, culture, and organizational health. I'm your host, Pat Lencioni, joined by my regular, trusty, wonderful co-host, Cody Thompson. How's it going today, Cody?
Flew all the way to Nashville just to podcast virtually in a different room than you are.
Yeah, that's right. You're around the corner and down the hall. It's great to have you here. It always is. We have a big group here today. Hey, what are we going to talk about today, Cody?
This will be a fun one. It's called What is a Toxic Culture?
That's right. That's right. Recently, Monster, not the energy drink, but the recruiting company, I'm pretty sure it might have been the energy drink, did a survey of employees, over 1,000 employees in different industries, and asked them about their work experience. And 80% of them reported having a toxic work environment. And I thought this was really interesting. And so we want to talk about today. This is going to be really fun because this really goes back to the very beginning of why we started this company 28 years ago. The first thing, though, I want to talk about, Cody, is they didn't define toxic in this article.
Right.
And so that's okay. We're going to talk about that today. But the other thing is the question we have to ask ourselves is, who did they survey? Because if you were to survey in a company and you had an equal number of employees that were great and a bunch of employees that were not great, who did not fit there or were not really great workers. If the ones who are not great workers call it toxic, that's not such a bad thing.
Yeah.
So it really depends on who they asked. And if they said, of our top performers at our company, they called it toxic, I'm super scared. If they asked a bunch of people at a really big, mediocre organization, I don't want to say the DMV or something because some DMVs are better than others, but you know what I mean? I don't know that I would give it as much credence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I mean, you're right. If there's a bunch of low performers in an environment that doesn't value low performance and they're getting constantly reminded about all this stuff, then yeah, they might survey and say, yeah, this place sucks. It's terrible to work here, which would be a great thing. And then it would be sort of like maybe a 180 survey. It'd be interesting to have okay, you fill out these answers. Now we're going to have your fellow employees rate whether you're the toxic person, like where are you in this survey? So there's a few variables for sure.
Exactly. Now, the fact that it was 80% says, okay, there's something there. And even though they didn't define toxic, that's not a good word,
Mm-hmm.
So whether some people said there's not enough perks, and I know a lot of people in the article I read, there were people that said, what you need is more mental health programs or more benefits or better lunch program or something like that. And we generally reject that out of hand, right?
That's why it's so important for us to go actually define what toxic is. And
Exactly.
They should have in this thing is because it certainly doesn't mean that you can get free chargers or juice in the lunchroom, or bring your pet to work. But some people now have some expectations that might say oh yeah, there are no perks here. So this is a toxic work environment. It's a really interesting thing to kind of tease out. But so I want to get into that, Pat. But before this, you said 28 years ago, you started this company, which is, so I would ask you, in 28 years of doing organizational health work, if you were to survey the same 1,000 people or 1,000 people in different industries 28 years ago, do you think it's a greater percentage of companies or employees are experiencing a toxic environment, or is it getting better? What's the mega trend of that in business?
Well, that's a great question and a hard question. I think that there are many companies where it's much better than it's ever been. I think there are really great companies out there that really work on creating a healthy work environment. But there's a lot of accountability, and they ask people to work hard, and people need to know what they're doing, and they're well managed. I think among many large companies that have kind of drifted with the culture, and certainly in certain sectors like government and other things, I think it's worse than it's ever been. So I think it's more of a differentiator than it's ever been. I think the great companies out there really work hard to make their organizations healthy. It's still messy, But bad employees who make it into those organizations will say, this place is toxic. I want to get out of here.
Yeah.
And in the other organizations, I bet the best people are like, this place is toxic. I need to get out of here.
Yeah.
So I think more than ever, it's less about what's true across society. And it really depends on the company itself. Now, what I will say this, Cody, though, what I think has not changed in 28 years is that if somebody came to me, if a leadership team came to me and said, we just did a survey and a lot of our employees think it's toxic here, my answer to them would be the same thing. It's either because the executive team is toxic, and I really want to survey them and give them enough truth serum or bourbon where they tell me the truth, like, hey, what's going on? Or they are knowingly permitting other people to do things that are toxic in the environment or unhealthy. I think you're never going to find an organization where the executive team is like, man, we trust each other. We argue well. We make decisions. We hold each other accountable. We're all about the company, not about ourselves. And somehow toxicity just develops in the rest of the organization. I mean, that's almost impossible. The worst or the best case scenario is the executive team is really healthy, but they're just a little wimpy about calling people out when they do things that are toxic. But almost always you can translate an unhealthy culture, call it toxic, call it dysfunctional, back to the executive team. And that's what I think is the answer.
No, I think you're exactly right. And you were even maybe more generous as like, I don't know that have you ever been to an organization where you were like, yeah, the team at the top is super healthy, but all these other people are the problem. Like that's almost never the case. And so I kind of like the idea of toxic. I almost imagine like sort of a biohazard sort of waste thing. It's like it starts at the top and it drips all the way down. Like so it's not that it just somehow bubbles up from the bottom. It really does, and so we can define what toxic means, but it starts with dysfunction on the executive team.
Yeah. If there really were a good survey and employee engagement surveys I've written many of them and implemented many of them over the years before I started my own company. It's tough because people are like, should I say it honestly? Do people really know? And does it benefit my career to be honest? It's hard to get that. But if you could do that, and some are better than others, and I know there's good surveys out there, but I think what I would do is I would just go, if let's say a company did a survey, I were the leader, I would say, first of all, I'm going to do everything I can up here. Then I want to find out what parts of the organization do we have pockets of toxicity. And then I'm going to go to the person in charge of that and go, what are you doing? What sins of omission or commission are you committing that are either creating that or allowing that to happen? I mean, it should be like anything else. Hey, revenue's low in this region. Let's go to address that region and find out what you're doing or not doing. So sometimes I think we take too esoteric or general a view of this and go, oh, well, what needs to happen culturally? Well, what I say to executive teams when they tell me about morale problems or issues, it's like, well, everybody in this company reports to somebody in this room, right? And they're like, yeah. Well, then where do we need to start?
Well, it's funny. I love that idea. The two things is when you work in a toxic environment, you don't really need to answer a survey question to know that. Like I often think like, people wear these rings that tell you how well you sleep. And it's like, when you wake up, if you slept poorly. I don't need a number score from a watch to tell me that I didn't sleep well. And the same is true when you're at a toxic environment. It's like, I love, you've often said this, that if you could observe one thing in an organization to determine its level of health, people often think like, oh, is it their balance sheet? Is it their revenue, profit margin, all that stuff? And you say, I just want to observe the executive team during one meeting. And that's all it takes. It takes one meeting to get in there and say, you could walk out of that room and say, yeah, I bet this place is pretty healthy. There's lots of vulnerability. There's people challenging each other. There's no like ego in that room. The very opposite is often true, where you're like, yeah, those people don't trust each other. It creates all these politics and confusion that end up, spilling out into other levels of the company. It's not that, it's funny that we need a survey for that, but when you pull into the parking lot, you probably have a pretty good idea whether or not that's true.
Yeah. And yeah, you're right. And I will double down on that. I'm glad you said that, because I really do think that, like, when I think of the hundreds of executive teams I've worked with over the years and the companies that were really taught, you could see it in the executive team,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't, you could see it in terms of they were like being mean to each other. They just weren't having good conversations. They weren't pushing each other on things. People were avoiding stuff. It was really the messiest, most honest, raw meetings where you said, okay, there's not a lot of room for toxicity to develop out there because they're going to deal with it here.
Yeah.
We always say when there's dysfunction at the executive level, it creates just impossible. There's going to be bloody wars down below because they're not having the right level of healthy conflict at the top.
Yep.
But there's something else that I think is interesting that I was thinking about, and that is, but now I've just forgotten it, Cody, and that does happen sometimes, even on a podcast.
Well, while you're thinking of it, I think it's so interesting that you say that's the source, right? That's the source of the toxicity is the problem. I often think that when leaders get this survey back, and let's say their score is low, their employees believe that they have a toxic culture. Well, then they think the solution also starts somewhere outside of that room. Like, so in other words, the problem is outside of that room and the solution is often outside of that room. When what we would say to someone, if, hey, your morale is low or there's toxicity in your organization, your culture's bad, it starts right here, like in this room. So if you start healing in that room, if you start applying the medicine there, it's actually going to find its way into the rest of the organization. But oftentimes leaders get the results and they go, well, what department do we have to helicopter down into and like a surgeon try to cut out the toxin, when in fact that's never going to work because the solution is still more cohesion at the leadership team.
And what's interesting about that is what they're looking for, though, is a solution that doesn't require them to do something uncomfortable. Like, can we increase spending on mental health programs? Right. Or can we change something? And I get that. That's the easy way out. It just never works. And I remember what I was going to say before now, and that is I can't believe that when an executive team gets a survey back that says we have a dysfunctional or toxic culture, that they're really surprised. Right. I mean, and if they are, then I would go, that would be like saying, yeah, I think we're doing great in revenue. And it's like, oh my gosh, we're not even close. Well, if you really don't understand your business that well, then you're not doing your job. And if you really don't understand the culture that well, most executives you talk to go, no, I know people down there are frustrated. It's a hard place to work because they see it at their level as well. So I guess I would love to see that unicorn, that company where the executive team was super healthy and they were doing all the right things. And somehow, somewhere, I suppose if somebody were being really nefarious deeper in the organization and managing up well and planting seeds, I guess a really, really dangerous, as we say in the ideal team player, a skillful politician could create pockets of frustration deeper, but usually they're going to get discovered and addressed in a healthy organization.
Yeah. Pat, we kind of promise people to put some leaves on the tree of what is actually a toxic culture. Like, I think it would be interesting because I think that's one of the questions is like, what should it be? It's not certainly, lunchroom, snacks and things, but what is a toxic culture? Like, what should we be looking for? What should they have clarified on the survey as, hey, when we say this, we mean XYZ?
I think the number one thing is I can't say the truth to people. I have to edit and think about what I say for how it's going to be received. In other words, I don't go to meetings and just say what I think or call things out. I have to go to meetings and play politics. We define politics in organizations as saying things that you don't mean. Or
changing what you do or say based on who's in the room. Like if you're having a meeting before the meeting, a meeting after the meeting, or now with Zoom, a meeting during the meeting where people are chatting each other about whatever silliness is going on. But yeah, I love that definition.
That would be the first one. When people are going out in the hallway or in the parking lot and talking about things that they didn't say in a meeting, that's toxic. That's dysfunctional. So politics is the number one thing. The other thing that creates a toxic culture is when there are people that don't belong in that culture that are allowed to stay. Because then the number one way to drive great employees crazy is to keep bad employees. And bad would be either lazy, political, or that just don't actually appreciate the culture. And so they work against it. So tolerating poor performers and even more so poor behaviors is another real sign of an unhealthy organization. It's like a football team that's got a guy on the team that's really egotistical and really painful, and people hate it when he's in the huddle and when he's at practice, and they just won't get rid of him because he's so fast. That's always going to lead to a talk. So poor performers and behaviors that are being tolerated is another big sign of a toxic culture.
I would say in some organizations, it's worse than tolerated. Sometimes they're promoted, like And the message that sends is even more stark, to be like, not only are we going to allow this behavior, we're going to send a message to the rest of the organization that we don't care, and we're going to promote them to higher levels of income and title right in your face.
Exactly. What would be another sign? So we talked about the meetings outside, the politics that you see in meetings, the tolerance of poor performers or the promotion of them. I think another one is just confusion. This is probably the greatest tragedy because it's not done overtly, but it's when people just don't really know what the organization stands for, either in their core values, because they have 12 of them that don't mean anything, or even in terms of what they're trying to do in the market. And so people are just confused about what matters, because that's when you take really good people with generally the right intentions, but they just don't know what they're supposed to do. So when an executive team is vague and isn't clear about what success looks like, either behaviorally or in terms of performance, and it's hard to call that toxic, but what it does, confusion breeds a lack of confidence, and that can actually lead to toxic behavior without bad intentions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love the way you said that, because like confusion seems almost, neutral. Like, oh, hey, we just haven't clarified. But the effects of confusion on the individual worker is like low morale. Like we want clarity. We want to be able to know, like, what should I be working on and what's important in the organization. And oftentimes I think the way other people might describe it, Pat, is not just like vagueness. It's like shifting goals, like changing the goalposts or moving them and being like, wait, I thought this was success. And it turns out now weeks later, it's a totally different thing. That's a miserable place to be.
You know, it's something, Cody, is that we at the Table Group, who are supposed to be at the organizational development or organizational health company and human dignity and truth and everything, we have had moments of toxicity. Now, I don't think it's ever been like overt, terrible, but even every marriage has those times when they struggle. And
Yep.
we have allowed confusion to dictate. We've changed things too much, and good employees have tried to do the right thing and didn't know what it was. And it looked like politics. Like we were like, gosh, that person's a wonderful person. And they were just trying to figure out what to do. And we at the top, and it's my responsibility, we were like, yeah, we're confusing people right now. And it's leading to behaviors that could actually look political. And we've not addressed performance and behavior issues before for different reasons. And so nobody is immune to this. The best leader out there, if they're feeling bad, thinking, gosh, I think we might have some toxicity in my company, the answer is, yeah, you probably do. And there's something you can do about it. This is not a binary thing at all. It's just like the best husband or wife that loves their spouse is going to do selfish things. I was at a conference recently and I was talking about organizational health and I was talking about families. And this very high profile guy, you were there, Cody, said, he raised his hand in front of an entire room and says, yeah, I think I'm pretty political at home with my wife and kids. I think I'm selfish and I really want to change that. And everybody in the room was like, you rock, dude, because you just admitted that. So when you hear about toxicity in an organization, don't say, well, we probably would never be like that. Say, oh, there may be some that's creeping up. I want to go find that. And I'm the leader of the organization and I'm going to figure it out and own it.
Yeah, I think that's great, Pat, because as you were saying that, I was like, well, it's the 80% of these companies are identified as toxic. It's not that 80% of leaders have bad intentions and they're out there trying to ruin people's lives. It's actually this like, I want to do the right thing. I just don't know how. How do I minimize politics and confusion in my organization? So it's not like some, nefarious bad guy in a movie that's leading a company that's like, allowing or purposefully making the culture toxic. It's more likely people that do it by accident or don't understand the difference, and people are living in those environments, and it has a huge effect on the working population.
I'm going to do something bold here. I'm going to say, okay, it said 80%. Let's cut that in half and say half those employees were the kind that are like, people are making me do my job. Like when they said, tell me what you did last week. That's toxic. No, they're wrong. So let's say 40% of employees said, yeah, the work environment is toxic. Let's cut that in half and say 20% are like, hey, the executives are trying to do the right thing, but it's confusing. They're not making a decision and all these other things. I think probably the remaining 20% are like, I work in a really political, unhealthy, horrible environment. And those 20% probably need to think about finding a way into a better one. I don't think the majority of people work in an environment where people are actively okay with that. That doesn't mean that it's not doing a ton of damage, but I think that leaders should look at this and go, I'm going to go talk to people in my organization and find out, do you think there's politics here? Do you think poor performers are allowed to stay? Do you think you know what success looks like? Ask those questions. And if people are like, no, I go to meetings and other people go to meetings, they say what they need to say and nobody's holding back, good. No, I think that poor performers are dealt with. I think we know what the plan is and what success looks like behaviorally and performance wise. If people can give you an honest answer that those three things are happening, I think you can feel pretty good.
Yeah. And I think it's a reminder too, Pat, to say, like, in the same way there could be pockets of toxicity, there also can be pockets of health. So, there are team leaders that are not on the executive team that say, hey, in my little, what I can control for my team, we're going to value trust and vulnerability. We're going to build like this team cohesion and our ability to like clarify what success looks like. And so if you're listening to this and feeling like, man, I work in a company like that and I don't see a way out, start where you can, like start with your team. And
circle of influence, circle of concern. You know what I think? I don't like the word toxic. I think it's loaded. I think it'd be better if we said it's kind of dysfunctional or it's political, because you know what to do on that. Toxic almost feels like you're saying it's poisoned and it's never going to change. Yeah. So maybe let's end this podcast by saying, let's start calling out what the real problem is. Toxicity almost has a damning quality that makes it feel like if somebody said to you, you're toxic, it's like, oh, so there's no hope. Yeah. Or this relationship is toxic. That doesn't sound like there's any hope. Let's say, hey, we could be more honest, clearer, better performers, less political.
Love it.
All righty. We'll end it right there. We'd love it if you'd like us. Please like us or share this with a friend or make a nice comment. Anyway, whatever people do to advance the podcast, tell up your friends. We appreciate it. Most importantly, we appreciate you listening. We love it when we're out traveling and we meet people that listen to the podcast and tell us about different episodes. The fact that people are benefiting from this is just a blessing to us, and we really appreciate you. So we will talk to you next time on At the Table. God bless.